Good morning. Good morning. That's better. Let's get started. Good morning. I first like to welcome on behalf of UC Library to all of you, particularly students just joined us. Welcome. This is the first lecture for the German Americana Special Collection in the UC Library. I'm Shima Wang. I'm the Dean and the University Librarian for the UC here. So thank you for joining us today. Cincinnati is the city with rich German heritage, dating back to its inception in 1788 and 1836 marked the arrival of the unaware family who found their home among the city's active German community. Today, we celebrate their commitment to preserve nearly 2 centuries of German American culture and heritage. Thanks to the generous endowment from the March and the Charles J. Schott Foundation, I just checked the foundation does not have any representative here. I would like to thank them. This gift, the Charlotte and Edward Unaware Funds for the German Americana Special Collection, will endow this important collection for its perpetuity and enhance through the digitization, restoration, programming like today's lecture. The University of Cincinnati Library has the vision to become the globally engaged intellectual commerce of our university. It's a broad vision, reaching across global to encompass partnership and collaboration we already established from Egypt to Africa and China. But the vision also includes places much closer to our home. The University of Cincinnati is an urban university. The term often refers to its location, positioned in the heart of Cincinnati. But it's so much more than that. UC is a reflection of the city itself, and the University of Cincinnati Library is proud to help to celebrate city's unique characters. Now I'd like to welcome to the podium Kevin Grace, head of the Archive Rare Books Library for the UC and the University Archives. Kevin, enjoy the lecture.
Thanks very much. Don's been retired from the university now for a little over 11 years, and we were colleagues for a long time. What I miss most is before we got a coffee maker, one day Don would bring in White Castle coffee, and then the next day I would bring in UDF coffee. So we always had good coffee then. Nowadays with the coffee maker, not so good. But when I first came here, Don was already well established as a librarian here. He was one of the first faculty librarians here to actually hold a teaching appointment as well. So we started having that bridge between the libraries and the teaching faculty in A&S and other colleges. So that really started us off on that aspect of our becoming more engaged with teaching and research in the university. Now, it's because of his interest in the German heritage of Cincinnati that he discovered H.H. Fick's personal library that we had here at UC, and from that he was able to build this collection, and from that it became a worldwide resource, so we really had a global reach as well. He's still engaged in the community. He will try and tell you certain facts that may or may not be true. For instance, that cornhole was invented by West Side Germans. But he did do considerable research on Goethe as well. So he also tried to tell me once when I used to teach a course on the social history of baseball that baseball was invented in Germany. So anything good is German of origin, except Mark Sweeney here, and I know that the Irish of Cincinnati contributed quite a bit as well. But anyway, the valuable thing about Don is that he's not only made the German Americana collection here a national center for that kind of research, but he's established a global presence for it as well. And even more importantly to us, in his retirement, he's maintained this strong connection to the community. And that's what we value the most, because UC has always been an urban university and closely tied to Cincinnati. So with no further ado, and I don't know what he's going to try and tell you now, let's welcome Don Heinrich Tolzmann.
I think I have a mic. Thank you very much, Kevin and Dean Wong. It's an honor to be here and a pleasure. And I'm so glad to see all you, many of my good friends, and all of you here and the students from Elder. I really appreciate seeing you all. And coming to hear me talk about the German Americana collection and how it came to be. And for me, it's a personal and a professional story, and so my talk blends in biographical and historical elements along the way in explaining how it came to be. When it was established in 1974, the nucleus of the collection consisted of the private library of Heinrich Hermann Fick, who was best known by his initials and academic title as Dr. H.H. Fick. He was born in 1849 in Lübeck in northern Germany. He passed away in 1935 in Chicago, but spent most of his life in Cincinnati, where he served as supervisor of the German department of the Cincinnati Public Schools before World War I. Now, at that time, there were about 175 teachers of German, more than 15,000 students taking German. Although it was an elective, just about everybody took German. For example, when I met Ted Berry, the first black mayor of Cincinnati, he greeted me by saying, "Guten Tag, wie geht's?" And I asked him, well, how come you know German? And he said he had taken it in the bilingual program before the First World War. Well, he spent a lot of time, Dr. Fick, assembling a private library of German language books, pamphlets, journals, scrapbooks, manuscripts, focusing on German heritage in America, especially in Cincinnati. In 1990, a 2-volume catalog of the collection was published. I put together, published in Munich, came out in 1990. It was about midpoint in my career here. I started in 1974, retired in 2007, and have kept in touch with Kevin and the library ever since. The collection has really grown substantially since that time. Now, some people might ask, how did I get interested in books and German culture? And I guess I could refer to a page from a German sermon book of my grandfather. And in it, he recorded family history in the old German script with all the pertinent dates. Maybe some of you can read that, maybe not. But this got me interested in learning to read German script, and I should say how to decipher it, because it often looks like a bunch of chicken scratches. But I did. My family settled in Minnesota near New Ulm. German immigrants from Pomerania. New Ulm was a town founded by the Cincinnati Turnverein in the 1850s, so I heard of Cincinnati long before I'd ever thought of coming to this beautiful city. My career in library started at Walter Library at the University of Minnesota. I worked as a student assistant in the reference department and began my love affair with libraries. By this time, my interests were fairly well defined: German and history, and a minor in library science. For my history major, I studied under Rudolf Nicoli, a well-known Italian-American scholar who was director of the Immigration History Research Center. Even though we are a nation of immigrants and their descendants, he stressed that their history was a neglected dimension of American history, and he advised that this was a shortcoming that ought to be addressed. and this was an admonition that I took to heart as a student. By this time, I started collecting books, German books, and frequented all the antique bookstores I could find. I found a complete set of the works of Heinrich Rodman, shown here with his distinctive beard. He was a well-known historian in Cincinnati before the First World War. His Germania building is at 12th and Walnut in the Over-the-Rhine district, where he had his German Mutual Insurance Company, and that's on the National Register of Historic Places now. He was best known for his work as editor of the historical journal Der Deutsche Pionier, the German Pioneer. He focused on immigration and German settlement to our area, and his work introduced me to the Ohio River Valley. Now, while I was still a student, I read an article in one of the German papers my family subscribed to, and it was an article by Barbour Award, chairman of the language department at Youngstown State University. He wrote about his research on German American literature, and that he was looking for books and journals for the library at Youngstown State. I wrote him that I had come across an antique store in Minneapolis that had acquired what he described as the contents of the last German bookstore in Cincinnati. I indicated I could facilitate acquisition of materials for his library and proceeded to do so. He also organized the Society for German American Studies, which I joined and in later years became president of. So he was a very influential person for me. This Society for German American Studies also began publication of a scholarly journal, the Journal of German American Studies, with Ward as editor. The first two issues of that journal contained an article by Ward that interested me very much. It was entitled The German American Library of H. Fick, a Rediscovery. It briefly told of his life and work, but consisted of a checklist of all the books that were in his collection. In retirement, Fick lived in Chicago for part of the year, where one of his daughters lived, and the rest of the year with another daughter in Indianapolis. He came to America in 1864, landing in New York, where he had an uncle. After working there, he came to Cincinnati and found employment as a teacher of German. Later on, he went to Ohio University, where he earned one of the very first PhDs offered there. After getting his degree, he came back to Cincinnati, and he became principal at the 6th District School on Elm Street in the Over-the-Rhine district. He then became an assistant superintendent and eventually supervisor of the German department of the public schools, which I mentioned earlier. He did write and publish a whole series of textbooks that were used in the Cincinnati public schools and across the country, and they consisted of readings about German and American history and culture, and they reflected his views of bringing both cultures together in a cultural synthesis. He also edited a journal for children, Young America, Young America. He was a member of the German Literary Club, which was founded in 1877, and he presented more than 50 lectures there on various topics. And in 1927, they had their 50th anniversary at Grammer's in Over the Rhine. He also was an author. This was his one of his poetry books, in Freud und Leid, Gedichte, in Joy and Sorrows. And a review in the local German press said This consisted of the pearls of German American poetry. It is pure gold, this collection, and should not be missing in any family. And it had all kinds of interesting poems on German customs and traditions, how to celebrate Christmas, New Year's, Thanksgiving, a very nice collection of verse. He passed away in 1935, and a memorial service was held for him at Spring Grove. And before his demise, a fellow member of the German Literary Club, Edwin Seidel, who was chairman of the German department here, succeeded in having his private library acquired for the university library. Now, in that journal, which I read about him in his library, I also read about Robert Caston, a professor of library science at the University of Kentucky, and he wrote that he was putting together a history of the German book trade in America. Well, these things were just what I was interested in: library science, German books, German heritage. So I applied to the University of Kentucky and was accepted into that program. And I was fortunate enough to become his research assistant. And I spent all of my time transcribing and translating materials from the old German script, from those chicken scratches that I was talking about earlier. And that was a job. When I graduated, of course, I knew about the collections here, and I applied for a position at the University Library. There was no advertisement for a job, so I applied anyway, and I was invited for an interview. And they asked me, well, why did you apply for a job here? There's nothing's advertised. And I said, well, I know about your collections holdings, and I'd like to get a job here. And so they created a position for a German librarian, which I gladly accepted, starting in early 1974. And then I recommended that a special collection should be established. And it was that spring after I came, and thus I became its curator. Now, of course, in building the collection, one of the first things I did was to look around at all the local bookstores and to see what kinds of materials they might have. And one of the earliest finds was just nearby at Dutenhofer's bookstore, where I found Der Wahrheitsfreund, which was the first German Catholic newspaper in the United States. Commenced publication in 1939. I tried to go to the other bookstores and acquire materials that would be relevant to us. Also contacted bookstores in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. Of course, not all newspapers were available in original form, and so we acquired newspapers, German newspapers, for a whole series of cities in the United States: St. Louis, Milwaukee, Chicago, Cleveland, New York, and elsewhere. And I can really say that we have of German newspapers printed in America the best collection, without question, in the United States. I mean, there's just no question of what we have here. Now, the records of churches in the area are also important, and I went right across the street to the Third Protestant Memorial Church, and that church was very important because its roots go back to the very first German congregation in Cincinnati that was founded in 1814. And I spoke there they invited me to speak during a church service. I didn't give a sermon, but I did speak on the history of the congregation. And I said, a great place to give your records would be across the street to the Blagan Library, to the German Americana collection. And they did donate them. So the records from other churches were acquired also. Needless to say, many of these records might have been lost. Just south of Blagen Library is the old Steuben Hall, which were all the German societies used to meet. And I became very much involved in the German community, as Kevin mentioned. I spoke there countless number of times on various topics. Eventually also became president of the German American Citizens League. This is a poster printed by the Wolf Printing Company of Covington for the German American Citizens League for a German Day. I discovered that the Wolf Printing Company in Covington was the very last German English printing company in our area. It was in business into the 1970s, and I went there and I said, could I have a copy of all your imprints and everything you printed? And they gave them to me, which I'm glad that happened, because shortly after they did go out of business. All of this material would have been lost, I'm sure. And it consisted of histories of German societies, churches, flyers, broadsides, tickets, performances at the local German theater, and so on. Just a valuable collection of local historical information. I also began writing for the local German newspaper here, the Cincinnati Courier, and wrote about the collection and other German heritage topics for that newspaper. And that succeeded in making the collection known in the community and getting additional donations. And as a result, I got to know Gerd Niers, editor of the New Yorker Staatszeitung, a German newspaper in New York, and he invited me to write for his paper, which I did. And then later on I asked if he'd like to donate materials from the New Yorker Staatszeitung archive, and he donated those to the collection. They really are a valuable document for the period of the 1950s through 70s. And I'm sure that without getting that collection, that a lot of those materials would have been lost and discarded. Another valuable document of recent history. Another a valuable addition came from the collection of Karl Arndt, who was one of the foremost scholars in the field of German American studies. He came here in the 1970s already and did a lot of research using the collection. And I have to quote one thing he said about the collection even then. He said, it contains treasures, and especially Cincinnati treasures, which must be considered for the entire study of the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys. And that is so true. He published several books that are bibliographies of the German American press in America. And in my remarks, I cannot mention all the different collections that we've gotten. Individual works, but collections from scholars, individuals, societies, churches. I can't begin to go through and mention all of those. Robert Caston, my mentor, he published an essay in 2001, Some Memories of Travel and Research in German American Studies, and he noted the rarity of German Americana, and he wrote in this essay, prior to the 1970s, many American libraries and historical societies had made only token efforts to collect German and other ethnic materials. He also commented that by this time, much had already been lost. Fortunately, of course, the German Americana collection was now in place, and so he decided to donate his valuable and sizable collection to our collection here. And it consisted of books, periodicals, pamphlets, letters, microphones. Incredible what he donated. Now, as you might know, we're getting all of these things that we're getting for the library, building the collection. And fortunately, in the 1980s, we needed a German cataloger to catalog all of these materials. And we were so fortunate to get Frances Ott Allen, who's sitting here in the front, who was a German cataloger here for many years. She also was a secretary of the Society for German American Studies and an officer of the German American Citizens League. And she is a scholar in her own right, published a landmark book, Cincinnati German Imprints, a checklist, which lists more than 1,400 German imprints in Cincinnati. That'll give you an idea of how the strength of German heritage. 1,400 German language imprints in this city. I mean, it's an incredible and phenomenal number. Just a great piece of scholarship on her part. Jerry Glen, a professor of German, became a good friend and colleague, and together we organized a number of conferences here to make the collection known. The first one we had in 1976. We coordinated others in the 1980s, and into the 1990s we did have symposia here which were entitled Ohio Tall Symposium, Ohio Valley German Heritage Symposium. He also was responsible for getting the collection and literary estate of a German-American author, Alfred Gong. So he was very important partner and shows a connection with the library and the German department, which has always been very close. In 1999, Richard Shaba, who's sitting up front here, and is another good friend and colleague, we took part in an international symposium in Kamenz, Germany, that was sponsored by the Lessing Society, and I spoke on the history of the collection, and Richard spoke on the German element of Cincinnati. The theme of the conference was German-American Enlightenment Culture in Cincinnati. And I should also mention that Richard has donated the papers of his father, Gerhard Schade, an author and poet, whose articles appeared in the New Yorker Staatszeitung. Now, exhibits are another way to make the collection known, and we have had a long history of having exhibits going back to the 1970s. One of them was, I point out, took place in 2004 on the 30th anniversary of the collection, and highlighted some of the unique items that are in the collection. And on the cover, you see one of them, an 18th century Bible printed in German in Pennsylvania. And this is the title page. It was printed in 1776 in Germantown, which is now part of Philadelphia. It was called the Gunwad Bible. It was so called because its pages were used to stuff the muskets of British soldiers when they occupied Philadelphia during the American Revolution. Because of this use for stuffing muskets, the Bible itself, there were 3,000 copies printed. It was almost completely destroyed by the British, and we have a copy of this extremely, extremely rare Bible. Something to be very proud of that we have. Another unique item, and there are several that relate to local history, but one I was happy to get a hold of was an 1857 letter written by John Roebling, the famous chief engineer for the construction of the Roebling suspension bridge on the Ohio River. And his letter was written actually while he was here working on the bridge. And he discusses the importance of using iron rope as opposed to copper rope for the building of cables. So another real gem. I can't begin to tell you how valuable letters are today. You can look on the rare book sites. Finding a letter signed by Roebling is really something. Most recently, I have worked with Kevin, and I have given a number of items that I have collected. Of course, I started collecting many decades ago when I was a student, giving material and been donating things to the German Americana collection. One such item was this, the Abendschule, the Evening School, which is a popular family journal that was published in St. Louis. And I like this particular issue, which was published during World War I, because it demonstrates German-American patriotism to the new homeland during a very trying time for German heritage during the war. So by way of conclusion, to get to this survey overview, I just want to note that it was my goal to make the German Americana collection the premier collection of its kind, which in the course of time it truly has become. I hope my comments have succeeded in telling the story of how it came to be and why it is one of the gems in the collections of the university libraries, and it is also one of the gems in the crown of the Queen City of the West. Thank you.
Say a little bit more about the gift that the Shaba Foundation gave us, and that was really facilitated by Christopher Bernardo, our development director. This is the second gift we've got from the Shaba Foundation. The first one allowed us to, thanks, Jay. The first one allowed us to renovate the 8th floor where the Archives of Your Books Library is located. But the second gift, the reason we brought Don in, is that it's a gift for the collection itself. And it is allowing us to build the collection more, but also to digitize. And our intern this year, Aaliyah Wagner, who has recently accepted a position at Miami as their digital librarian, she prepared with Era, Tansy, and Sue Reller, our other archivists in the department, a work plan to digitize those Third German Protestant church records, and we hope to do that soon. And then the endowment from the Shaba Foundation also allows us to have an annual lecture. And so we figured the first one, it was logical to have Don do that. We couldn't think of anything else. It's really great to see so many of our colleagues here. Tom has gotten up this morning from retirement. Mark Kobasic has gotten up from retirement. Francis has gotten up. And so it's really gratifying to see that the support from our own colleagues, but also from the community, continues for the German Americana collection. So we look forward to much more in the future. As Don said, he's donated some of his papers already. And I will say that after Sue and Aaron, our students, process them, we've gotten a lot of students coming in to use that material. So that's very gratifying as well. And I want to thank Gmo for his incredible support of special collections at the university. University libraries have the same stuff, so you have to figure out what's different for us. Ohio State has specialties, we have specialties, and I think the German Americana collection is something that sets us apart not only in American libraries, but in international libraries as well. So again, thank you, Don, and if you have any questions or comments for Don, I'm sure he'll tell you about Goethe. Well, what else did you say the Germans invented? New Year's Eve?
Christmas custom in Jersey.
Christmas custom. Christmas tree. Christ.
Christmas tree.
Jesus was actually delivered by a German physician. Anyway, I'll turn it over to Don again if you have any questions or comments. Richard.
Tom, thank you for your presentation. It was a wonderful overview. My question is really, how can the library, or does the library of rare books, and this is also to you, Kevin, can I use the word aggressively pursue sources of current German-American history? I think, just for example, right down the street, we have the German language school. And you may say, well, this isn't old Germany, this is new Germany, presented in the Cincinnati public school system. But they have documents over the years, they have festivals over the years. Are these kind of institutions, for lack of a better term, targeted by the collection here, so those people become aware not to throw things away? And just one example of my own experience. Several years ago, the German department was cleaning out its files, and I was asked to look at the files. And I'm a Günter Grass scholar, and I found a whole group of folders focusing on Günter Grass's visit to Cincinnati in 1965. That would have gone the way of all documents. I'm just wondering, is there a sort of a policy of acquisition, not only at school, but other institutions in the city?
Well, I would say that the University of Cincinnati has always had a long history of community involvement. It was early on a municipal university, became a state, so it's always had a close connection with the community. And I think Kevin, too, is a good example of being very involved with the community, speaking at programs and so on. And this is kind of the model that I always had of not being an ivory tower scholar, remote, but directly involved with the community organizations, and I think that's the kind of model that we have followed, is community involvement, working with the community, town and gown connections. I don't know, would Kevin, would you say that was something?
Well, you had asked a good question, Richard, about pursuing these, and as we know from experience, sometimes we'll pursue a collection for 10, 15, 20 years before it becomes real. With the Cincinnati Public Schools and the German language school down there, it's a little bit more difficult because you're trying to get cooperation from the Cincinnati Board of Education. And that's not always easy. I mean, it's no fault of theirs, it's just the way things are. In terms of your German department records like that, well, Era Tansey is actually the university records manager, and so the idea is that nobody throws anything away at UC without letting her know first. That's the ideal. The real is something else. But yeah, we depend on people calling collections to our attention. And Don has certainly done that. And we do keep tabs on what the Cincinnati German community is doing. We get the newsletter from the German American Citizens League. So we know about all that. Gert, for instance, donated his personal collection of books. Sue has been cataloging those. We have a want list, essentially, of what we would like. And we would like more archival collections of everyday German organizations here. Whether it's an organization devoted to dance or to socializing or the Kolping Society, for instance. That's the kind of thing we're geared to because that's the kind of thing that people want to research. And so we hope things aren't thrown away or that they at least think of us and let us know that they're getting rid of something. So that's our effort.
I might also add, too, that one thing really great about UC is the tremendous public relations department we have here. And I do want to recognize Dawn Fuller, who wrote so many articles about the collection, and Greg Ham, who was in charge of public relations here for many years. They really have done a wonderful job in making known specifically the German Americana collection, but also things about UC. Great public relations program from the university.
So yeah, the effort is there. It's not as widespread as we would like, but get up and do our best, I guess. Any other comments or questions for Don? Yeah.
So you mentioned looking at local bookstores. Have you ever had any luck finding anything interesting at like Friends of the Public Library, since we do get so much, there is so much going in there on a regular basis?
Could you repeat that, please? Sorry, but
sorry. You mentioned going to local bookstores, and I was just curious if you had ever found anything interesting at like the Friends of the Public Library storehouse, since they do get regular donations in from local people all the time. I was just curious if you had I can't speak. I'm so sorry. If you had ever found anything interesting there.
well, I have gone to all the, I went to all the local bookstores and antique stores, estate sales. You can find books just about any place in this community. So, but I think they're becoming scarcer and scarcer as time goes by. So such materials are rare, and it just takes a lot of effort going out and looking for things and publicizing them, as I mentioned, and trying to find them. But they're out there, and we keep finding things keep turning up, such as that Roebling letter that I pointed out. So there's still a lot of things out there, and unfortunately, a lot of them are thrown out or not recognized for their value. But I always say too, with regard to German materials, anything that turns up should be examined and looked at as to its possible value. It's worth taking a look at. And I didn't go into just, I've written a lot too about the wars. Unfortunately, a lot was lost during the period of the World Wars, and many of the public libraries too got rid of a lot of their materials. So that heightens the value too of what we have here. Such a valuable repository where they're retained.
Well, I think that's true, Don, too, because despite what we've saved with the anti-German sentiment in Cincinnati during World War I particularly, we did lose a lot. We're a strong German city, but you wouldn't have known that from the anti-German reaction during World War I. And we should point out, too, this is an area where high school students could really help us by documenting their community. Don was part of the effort in Cincinnati to restore the German names to the streets. Most of you know during World War I, they switched a lot of the street names from German names like Bremen Street to English names. And a few years ago, Don was part of the local German effort to restore those names. And if you go down and over the Rhine now, you'll see them above the street names. That's the kind of thing where high school students can help us, where community members can help us too in documenting what goes on in Cincinnati over the decades. And that way a lot of actual materials are saved as well.
Well, I might add too, I'm so glad that there are students from Elder here, because the students of German, you can use that language in helping to research and study Cincinnati and our community. German here is not anything foreign, it's right at home. And you can help explain our community and our history. And if you come here, we have a great German department, and the collection here, you have a lot of opportunities to use your German skills right here and benefit our community.
Yes, ma'am.
Just piggyback on what you said about the Friends of the Library. I've been there, and occasionally I've seen a couple of German books. But most of the people who want to get rid of the German libraries, they always contact us at the German Heritage Museum, and sometimes they bring books and books. And then we at the German Heritage Museum And whatever is left, we always take them, or some other people take them to the German festivals, and people buy them. Yes, because we try not to just throw them away, because it's too important to keep the German.
And I might follow up on that by mentioning German Americana. What we're talking about are German books printed and published in the U.S. and in Cincinnati. We get an avalanche with books, of course, from Germany. I remember people were always calling me, well, I have a German Bible, or I have Schiller and Goethe. You know, we have tons of that material. But books printed here in this country, these are the things that we're collecting. Those are the things that are of value. The other materials exist in good number and can be found locally in the public library and so on.
I will put out a plug here. On our Archives and Rare Books Library webpage, we have a list of desired items that we would like. And some of them are rare books, some of them are collections. But we really want to document everyday life, particularly of German Americans. And so one of the things we're looking for sounds rather plain and uninteresting, but it's really not, and that's German American cookbooks. And the reason is because a lot of these community German American cookbooks generally have a page or two at the front that talks about the formation of that organization. And so it gives you a rich history, not only of the cuisine, but also of these local community endeavors. And that's one of the things we're looking for too. And so hopefully a lot of those will start popping up. Richard?
I just want to footnote to the question about local bookstores. I was with Kevin just yesterday in preparation of this get-together. And years ago, I used to prowl acres of books in various bookstores downtown, some of which are still in existence, but most of them have gone the way of all bookstores, I guess. And I came across an early 19th century imprint from Ephrata, Pennsylvania, in German of a 17th century German text. Now, the text itself is not that interesting, perhaps, to people other than me, who's interested in German mysticism in the 17th century, but it's an Ephrata imprint, and that's what makes it a valuable book. I believe, and I want to give this to the UC Rare Book collection, the German Americana collection. You have to, keep prowling bookstores, and there are fewer and fewer things, but they're still there. And another issue I think is important is our focus is so often on things of this nature, but there's Jewish culture in Cincinnati, German Jewish, and the Clow Library has an incredible collection of materials. And I assume the cooperation between UC and HUC is very close in those terms. That's just a footnote to your comment.
Okay, well, thank you very much for attending, and we'll just leave the rest of the time for some socializing, to talk with Don, and enjoy the refreshments that the Foundation has provided us. And again, thank you for coming, and come visit us.
Thank you.